My name is Dr. Joshua Fredenberg. As you all may know, I am a national speaker, author now of 6 books, and president of the Circle of Change Leadership Experience, which ultimately the sponsor of this event. The Circle of Change Leadership Conference is really simple. Our goal is to ultimately to empower first generation and culturally diverse students with leadership and professional skills that not only enable them to position themselves for career leadership success, but ultimately the inspiration and the confidence to go out there and make an impact in their community, their nation, and their world. And for those of you who may be joining us today, you know that we just came off of our 11th annual Circle of Change Leadership Experience. It was a little pivot this year because we went from in-person to virtual. So we literally were there for 6 days. You got that right. 6 days. We had an incredible time. People's lives were impacted. And literally it went so good that I'm super happy to announce that, as you already know, that coming up this spring, we are doing the first generation students career conference. So for 2 days, we're going to be reaching out to students all across the country, and we're going to be helping first generation students ultimately develop the skills necessary, not only for leadership success, but career success as well. And we have some specific sessions that'll be targeted towards first generation students with first generation panelists as well. So whatever you do, if you work with first generation students, if you work with culturally diverse students, whatever you do, make sure you spread the word. We are super excited about what's going to transpire in April, because I believe it's very needed right now, especially with all the transitions with COVID-19. So we're just trying to be a resource and bring value to all these culturally diverse and first generation students out there. And so whatever you do, make sure you register, make sure you get your students involved, and that information should be showing up soon, but I wanted to make you aware of that as well. Secondly, also, we're going to be going back in these virtual master classes like we did last year. So this is the first of 2021, but again, we'll have another one every 3 weeks. So make sure you be on the lookout for those as well, because not only are these so fun, but we always have incredible panelists that share incredible information. So we're super excited about that. The next thing I want to mention to you is we're getting ready to get into this topic dealing with red leadership. And some people ask me the question, what is red leadership? Red leadership is R.E.D. It stands for retention, engagement, and development of culturally diverse leaders of the younger generation. And so ultimately, this is my newest book that is coming out within the next 2 weeks. And again, that link is going to come up in there as well. So if you want to get a copy, it'll be available very soon. I'll also have a free ebook, a chapter that I'll be giving out complimentary. So make sure you let us know if you're interested in that. But again, the book is really simple. It's about helping people become more effective at retaining, engaging, and developing culturally diverse leaders, primarily of the millennial and Gen Z generation. So that's ultimately what the book is about. And that's really what inspired this virtual masterclass today, because we have some incredible panelists that are doing incredible work around this very topic. They've done incredible work around millennials, around Gen Z, around DEI, around leadership. I mean, I'm just absolutely thrilled to have the people that we're going to have today begin to talk about issues that revolve around red leadership. So I really believe that we're going to be dropping some value. I believe you're going to be impacted. I believe you're going to get some great information as well. So we're getting ready to introduce our wonderful panelists today, and I'm super excited about that. Just want to make you aware, one of our panelists is not able to make it today because his father was battling Parkinson's disease, and he said it was getting towards the end, and so he had to be by his father, which is completely understandable. So we have 4 incredible speakers and panelists, and I'm super excited from all across the country. But before we get ready to introduce them, I just want to do a big shout out. I want to know, where are y'all at? So if you could just light up the chat screen real quick and just let me know, where are you coming from? Where are you at? I know normally we have people all across the country. So if you can represent your school, represent your city. I see Oklahoma City. I see Indianapolis. I see Mission Viejo. I see Maryland. We're going back to Cali, Cincinnati, New Jersey, Buffalo, New York, Petaluma, Bay Path University, Phoenix, Arizona, Boston, Massachusetts, Penn State, okay, Salisbury, North Carolina, Orlando, St. John's University, Brooklyn, BK, Dominguez, Arkansas, Monterey Bay, okay, represent. It's so good. Bloomfield, New Jersey, Durham, North Carolina, Allentown, Pennsylvania, Rider University, Sac State. So as you can tell, we got people all across the country. Thank you so much for representing. It's always good to know who is here with us in this incredible conversation. So without further ado, y'all did a wonderful job. We're getting ready to introduce our wonderful panelists. And so I'm going to go out to the state of California, and we're going to introduce our first panelist. Her name is Dr. Tanya Session. And if you can introduce yourself. And the first question, what is one myth that you have recognized as it relates to Gen Y and Gen Z? Dr. Sessions, it's on you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Josh. And wow, can I just have what you're having? Because your energy is on 10 right now. It's very, very my pleasure to be here with everyone. So glad to see so many people from across the nation and the different schools that are represented. So welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Tana M. Session. Yes, located here in Los Angeles, but originally from Brooklyn. So shout out to that person from Brooklyn. All right, BK all day. And I think the main thing that I hear a lot of times from hiring managers, executives, et cetera, is that Gen Y, Gen Z are entitled and that they want everything right now. And so that's one of the, I consider to be a myth about this particular group of individuals. I'm actually quite jealous of this generation, which is why I do a lot of work with them.
Awesome, awesome. Well, Dr. Session, thank you so much for being a part of this wonderful session today. We're so honored and grateful to have you here today. Now we're going to venture out into Minnesota. I want to represent True Pettigrew. If you can introduce yourself and let us know what is one myth you've identified as it relates to Gen Z or millennials.
Hey, Josh, thank you for having me, brother. So excited to be here. And again, so excited to be sharing the stage. Well, I guess it's a screen now, right? Not really quite the stage, to be sharing the screen with this talented group of panelists that you've put together. And hello to everyone, all the attendees and the participants that made the time to join to hear what we have to say today. And so True Pettigrew, I am the founder of True Access, which is a community bridge building organization, helping organizations across the country bridge divides, bridge gaps across different divides, whether that be racial divides, generational divides, gender, cultural divides, or relational divides of all kind. And I also serve the role of vice president of player programs and diversity and inclusion for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And one myth that I will echo with Dr. Session, I agree with that being a myth, but I would also say one of the myths that we hear about this younger generation is that they're lazy. And that is far, far, far from the truth. Definitely a myth. And I think where that gets confused is this generation has seen their generational counterparts that come before them that align themselves with professions that people expect that they should align themselves with versus pursuing passions. And they've seen the results of that. So I believe these generations are more in tune or more likely to pursue their passions. And so as long as it's something that's aligned with their passions, I think my experience is I've seen that our generational counterparts will work around the clock. But if it's not something that they're passionate about, they're less inclined to pursue it with the same veracity that their generational counterparts would expect them to do.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. So good to have you, True. Thank you so much for taking time to be a part of this wonderful session today. We're going to move into Canada, if I'm not mistaken, and we're going to go out and introduce Claire. Claire, welcome. Coming from Canada, please introduce yourself. Let us know what you do. And what is one myth that you've identified with millennials and Gen Z?
Yeah, of course. Hi, thanks for having me. I am Claire. I'm principal consultant / founder at Millennials at Work. And this is where we work with enterprise executives to be seen as top choice employer amongst top talents. And again, the myth which millennials and Gen Z, and I can speak of this as a late millennial myself, I'm kind of in between a millennial and Gen Z. And is the fact that millennials and Gen Z are all they're ready to bounce job any second. And And this is like I mean, although I feel like I see where the sentiment is coming from, if you look at statistics, there are quite a few statistics that actually support that millennial managers or people that are in higher responsibility positions are actually a lot less likely to resign. Actually, it's they're a lot less likely to resign compared to other generational counterparts. So that's something I wanted to bring up because all the other panelists so far brought up the points that I wanted to mention. So yeah, they're good. It had to be addressed though. So
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. So good to have you as well. And now we're going back to Minneapolis. We're going out there to Phil. Welcome, Phil. So happy that you're able to make it on short notice, by the way. And so had a busy week, a busy schedule, but just said he wanted to be here. So we're so grateful for that. Again, introduce yourself. Let all the wonderful people know what you do, as well as what is one myth that you've identified with millennials and Gen Z.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. If you thought Friday afternoon was a time to wind down, Dr. Josh has made sure all of our energy is pumped up. And I am so glad that you are hosting this event and really honored to be here. So I am currently serving as the managing director of Bridgeworks, a generational consulting firm that was founded in 1998. So when millennials were still in high school, they hadn't even entered the workforce. We were addressing the challenges between baby boomers and Gen Xers. And now we just continue to see that conversation evolve over time. And I have the opportunity, the privilege of doing presentations, doing a lot of consulting work, and developing solutions for companies far and wide. I have everything from lunch ladies in northern Minnesota to the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Wherever people interact with people, we try to help them understand one another. And to the point of your question, Claire is correct. The top myths have been addressed, but I will bring up another one, and that is that if you understand millennials, then you understand Gen Z. And nothing could be further from the truth from our research. We are seeing an entirely different mindset begin to evolve and enter the workforce. And I like what Claire says. She's on the border of the two generations, and we would refer to anyone born on the border of two as a cusper. And in our research, we find that cuspers understand the nuance of the two generations that they are sandwiched in between. And so they often serve as generational translators. And one more thought, another myth is that if you understand one millennial, you understand them all. And common sense tells you that a 38-year-old millennial is not the same as a 26-year-old millennial. So there's a lot of complexity to this conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing what all my fellow guests have to say as we get into your questions.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, Phil. Can we give all of our panelists a big virtual round of applause in virtual land? Just give them a big shout out. Let them know that you appreciate it. Thank y'all so much. We're getting ready to get into the first question now. One of the things that I discovered just through observation, through experience, and through research is I discovered that there were some workplace trends that I saw with millennials, such as more collaborative, the importance of feedback, the importance from a leadership standpoint of integrating what I call coaching techniques as far as leadership is concerned, and also the importance of values as it relates to D&I. I found this, it was very important to millennials and as well as with Gen Zers as well. So Phil, I'm gonna start with you and then we'll begin to move through our panel. My first question is this: based on your research and based on based on what you saw as it relates to workplace trends with millennials and Gen Z, what are some hot trends that you think organizational leaders or leaders within higher education should be aware of right now?
All right. So there are several. I'm going to piggyback on something one of my co-panelists described in terms of that myth that millennials want to bounce jobs. I agree, it is a myth. It's not just a desire to leave their current company or a lack of loyalty, so much as it is having grown up in a world where things were constantly changing. It's almost been hardwired to believe if I don't have new opportunities and new challenges within my career, I will start to begin to feel like I'm becoming obsolete. So one trend that leaders need to understand is as long as you continue to develop your people, and historically that always meant, well, give them a new job title or a pay raise. That's not the definition by which they're understanding this. They want to just be growing professionally. And so that's a really important trend for people to understand. Another key trend is around Gen Z entering the workforce, and that is a myth that Gen Z is so they're dependent or they're driven or they need technology to feel connection. They know how to use technology. They are digital natives, but we're finding that the more high tech our society becomes, the more high touch people desire. And in truth, Gen Z is longing for relationship. So to bring it full circle to what you mentioned around 2020, this experience of remote work has been very challenging for a lot of Gen Z. Not that they can't understand the technology, but when they were entering into the workforce, they were looking forward to having human beings coach them, mentor them, develop them. And so finding ways through either distant learning, as we're seeing in our colleges and universities, so many of you that are on the call, as well as in an office or work environment remotely, how do you maintain relationship and still foster and grow people via technology when it's very challenging with different communication styles?
That's amazing. That's amazing. Some really good points. And I could clarify. I want the other panel to definitely chime in as far as the face-to-face. It was really interesting when I was doing a presentation in Hawaii. And I had baby boomers, I had Gen X, I had millennials, and I had Gen Z. And I said, I just want to see, how do you like to be communicated within the workplace? And I was astounded that number one was face-to-face amongst everyone. And it was actually contrary to what a lot of people have said as it relates to communication in the workplace. And I found that to be true and true all across. That's a phenomenal point as well. As in addition to everything else, but I want to open up to the other panelists. Anything you want to chime in? Claire, Dr. Sessions, True, anything you want to say in regards to that particular question? I know Dr. Sessions, so what do you want to say, Dr. Sessions?
Yeah, one of the things that I tell my clients that are trying to figure out how to integrate all these different generations with a focus on Gen Y and Gen Z is that group, first and foremost, they're currently 50% of the workforce when you combine them. And in the next 3 to 5 years, they're going to be 75%. And they're also the most culturally, socially, and ethnically diverse group to enter the workforce in history. So if organizations are not paying attention to what that means for this particular group as it relates to inclusion and belonging, whether that's remote or in an office, they're going to lose these people because their value system is based in that, is grounded in that. They expect to see representation of women. They expect to see everyone treated equally and fairly. They expect to see diverse faces in leadership. And they also believe that they can get to those positions when they see that representation. So if that's not there, to them, there's something missing in the value system and the core values of the organization, as well as in how they're actually presenting themselves publicly versus what's happening within the culture, which is why we have this cancel culture going on right now, right? They're the drivers of that. They have a loud voice, big boom mic, which is the social media platforms that they're on, and they use it. We've seen it done, over the last year in particular. So I think that's something that organizations and leaders need to pay attention to, is that this group has a big voice and they are very socially conscious. And if we're not paying attention to that, we're going to miss out.
Great point. And someone in the chat box just said, Dr. Sessions, yes, it does matter. Representation matters. That's amazing. True. Claire, chime in.
Claire, you want to jump in first?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think anyone else is gonna bring up this point, but I would say the biggest trend that I'm seeing as millennials and Gen Z are becoming the prominent generations, quote unquote, within the workplace is consumerization in the workplace. And here's what I mean by this is the fact that before in the workplace situation, it has been very one-sided. And whatever employer said, whatever employer wanted, that is what kind of went. And now as these younger generations are even older millennials are stepping to management positions, they're starting to really voice out their desire for collaboration or whatever it might be and then that's where the consumerization analogy comes in, because that's what consumers do with the companies that they buy from. They're always voicing their concerns, they're always giving feedback, they want to stay in the loop, and that behavior is being translated into the workforce for the very first time. And the younger the generation is, they're gonna want more of that. So that's what I wanted to bring up. And I would say the best way to sum this up is how would you treat you, like what questions would you ask your consumers as an organization? Like how would you treat your customers, and how can you translate that to employees? Because so many organizations prioritize consumers, what consumers are thinking, because that's what dictates the monetary success. But they don't really ask the same questions to employees, and they don't really show as much care to employees as they should. So that's the point that I wanted to bring up.
I love how you framed it.
Yeah.
I love how you framed it. I love that a lot. True.
No, that was great, Claire. And I do think that it's important that we look at this through a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. As we're talking about generational difference, Dr. Session pointed out, it's easy to be dismissive of someone when you haven't had their same life experience, right? And so when our older generational counterparts, typically those that are in leadership positions, oftentimes in those C-suites, we have to remember that the world we grew up in is not the world that this current generation is living in. And so it's very easy to be dismissive of someone else's experiences if they're not yours. And as Dr. Session referenced the importance of inclusion, something to keep in mind with this generation, but I believe all of us, it applies to all of us, but particularly from our millennial and Gen Z counterparts, where there's little to no inclusion, there's going to be little to no commitment. So taking a very prescriptive approach to Claire's point of saying, this is the path to success, this is the process to which you will get to where you want to go, and dictating that is not going to have as much efficacy as getting an understanding from that younger generational team member as to where you want to go, and then including them in developing that pathway to get there. You'll get much more buy-in and commitment when they are included versus being dictated to under the kind of the mantra of that's just the way we've always done things.
Oh, that's a great point. Those are some really great points. I love how you adjusted as far as leadership styles. And so it actually leads me into my next question I want to ask you. I'm going to start with you, True. So over the past year in 2020, with so much time on my hands right now, but in 2020, and I say that because I'm normally traveling, so I was at home much more, which I really loved a lot, by the way. A lot of stress going on, but still, I was at home a lot. But one of the things I did is I did a market survey, a sampling of about 600, 700 members of Millennials or Gen Z. And so people from all across the country, and there's a really unique set of questions that I asked that revolved around leadership and retention. And one of my questions I asked about was, what is one of the reasons why you would decide to stay with the company longer than 1 to 3 years? And I use the word 1 to 3 years. It was just based off my research as far as how long people stay at companies. And so it's just 1 to 3 years, what causes you to want to stay? And the top 3 things that came up were, number 1, it was passion, that what I was doing aligned with my passion. Number 2 was organizational culture, or I like to say a support system. And then number 3 was effective leadership. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But True, I want to start with you as it relates to passion, as it relates to organizational culture, as it relates to leadership. What specific things can leaders do to ensure that they are making sure that those people that they serve who are part of these 2 generations are in their passion, they have the right culture, or just as far as an effective leader? What are some antidotes, or so I like to say some gems that you can drop with us today that can be very helpful for those that either work alongside or are leading people of this upcoming generation?
Now, it's really about understanding what those passions are. Josh, you and I have talked about my series of GPS to purpose, right? And providing people with that GPS, yes, which a GPS obviously takes us where we want to go. But instead of a global positioning system, the GPS that I often talk about are our gifts, our passions, and our service. And helping people to get in where they fit in, to understand what their gifts are, and to help them leverage their gifts and understand how their gifts contribute to the greater good. Identify their passions, and then help them to identify that intersection point between their gifts and their passions, because that's where they will be the most valuable in how they serve the organization, serve your customer base, and serve the greater good of our society. And once you've helped them align their gifts and their passions in a way that they can serve the greater good, that it will be very hard to walk away from that, because you're operating in your calling, you're operating in your gifting, you're operating in your passion, and you are truly fulfilled by the heart. And once you've been able to combine all of that, and you are able to be rewarded for operating in that gift and that passion and how you serve, then that can really be the glue that can help generate retention. People often focus on recruiting, right? Recruiting diverse talent, recruiting young talent. But if you don't foster an environment and a culture where they can thrive once they arrive, then you fall short on the retention piece. It's awesome that you are being very proactive about recruiting diverse talent and young talent, but you have to be as proactive in creating and fostering a culture that retains it. Otherwise, you will not be able to retain that talent that you've been able to bring in the first place.
Wow, that's really good. That's really good. And a couple of things, I'm gonna get ready to move around. I know there's one thing that I was speaking with a speaker, and they use a concept, and some of you may have heard it before. They said, I don't say diversity and inclusion, I say inclusion and diversity. And I thought that was really powerful, because we can't even talk about diversity until we first talk about inclusion. And then the other thing that I think, True, you brought up, that I think was really powerful about the GPS was the S in service. And I think I saw it in research amongst millennials, and I'm sure I'm seeing with Gen Z, that it's not just about having a job, it's actually about having purpose, about making a difference and pursuing something that's bigger than them. So I thought I just want to interject that as well. But Dr. Sessions, Phil, Claire, whoever wants to go next, how would you like to respond to this question? Dr. Sessions.
I'll go next. So I'm going to jump right on what True said, because the wheels of my brain was spinning. So remember, I said I'm jealous of this generation, the two generations that are below me. So I'm Gen X. I'm going to be 52 next month. And it took me 50 years to find my passion, right? So what I've noticed about this generation is, we came into the workplace with this perceived life script. And we were told to go to school, get good grades, go to college, get a good job, make money, get married, start a family, save money, retire, and be happy. And these two generations are saying, why do I have to wait until the end to get happy? I want to start off being happy, and then the rest will fall into place, right? So we at one point, every single one of us on this panel, with the exception of Claire, but I'm going to include you, Claire, we were all millennials when we think about it. We were all these bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, 20-something-year-olds that entered the workforce excited, wanted to change the world, wanted to buck against the system, anti-status quo. Why does it have to be that way? I want to try it this way. But we conformed and we assimilated and we adapted to the systems. We didn't try to change those systems. And Gen Y and Gen Z is saying, why do we have to have systems? Why can't we do it this way? I want to try it. Let me have this opportunity to take a risk. You hired me for a reason. In my generation, Gen X, we didn't necessarily do that. We had some of that, but not enough. And so I feel like we've kind of passed the torch as parents and as co-workers of this next generation to empower them. And that's why I said I'm really excited to see what they do in the workplace. I've seen a lot of changes from an HR perspective that organizations have had to do in order to even recruit these groups of individuals, because I never heard of pet insurance until we started recruiting Gen Y rather. I was like, pet insurance, what is that? Is that a thing? But it is. And now that's a regular benefit for a lot of companies, where before, when I started, we thought it was a joke. But they asked for it and we had to find it, right? So I think we learning leaders, organizations learn how to meet them where they are, and also have foresight to see what else do we need to do, because there's another generation coming that's already here. And instead of us always having to adapt and change, let's be more forward thinking and think, what do we need to do holistically so that we can have a place of inclusion for everyone? So those are my thoughts.
I love that. I love that. Really great points. I love the forward thinking as well, but I know Phil has something to say. So Phil, it's on you.
Yeah, brilliant add-ins by everybody. I want to bounce back to something True said earlier about the importance of starting with retention before you focus on recruitment. And that's the best advice we give leaders. And you start with that internal culture. And to agree with Dr. Sessions, jealous of the how this generation is so networked and uses that the leverage of their social media, because if they love their culture, they will be the ones to recruit on your behalf if they feel like they belong, which then brings it back to Dr. Sessions' point about the importance of creating a real inclusive environment. And I think about how each of the generations, I'm Gen X as well. I was doing diversity. I was working in the sphere in the 90s, but we weren't talking about inclusivity and equity at that time. For us, it was just a huge stride forward to talk about diversity, but each new generation has advanced the conversation. And like you pointed out, Dr. Josh, now people are saying inclusive, IND, inclusivity and diversity. And then a good friend of mine out in California said, I don't want to be included. I want equity. I want to have the same status at the table. So again, the conversation continues to evolve, and where we see the challenge among the generations is people genuinely want to create a good culture, but they just perceive it different. So you might have a baby boomer saying, I don't understand. We are inclusive because look around. We have people from every different culture. Yeah, but not in the C-suite. Yeah, but not, all genders. And so that's where the conversation, it's so helpful to create a fully immersive environment where we understand and learn from one another, but at the same time, not disrespect the efforts of those that have gone before us, because we wouldn't be here if others hadn't began the conversation, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Oh, that's great. Oh, True. Then we'll come to you, Claire. True, what do you want to say, True?
I'm sorry, Claire. I just want to, while it's still fresh in my mind, because I'm not as young as I used to be, Claire, so I have to think about it.
I take notes.
But to Phil's point, I think too often, Phil, we have organizations that confuse diversity with inclusion and ignore equity altogether, right? But to the point you made, simply because you have a representation of diversity, it doesn't mean you're being inclusive. And so I think it's important that we do not confuse, for any organizations, any leaders that are listening, be careful not to confuse diversity with inclusion. Diversity by definition is the state of being different. And if you think about that definition, it's a state of being. It does not do anything, right? Inclusion is the act of making someone feel a part of. So the action is in the inclusion, because you can have a diverse organization, whether it's generational, cultural, gender, racial, ethnic, but if you are not including them, giving them a voice, allowing them a seat at the table, representation in the C-suite, then you're missing the mark inclusion. And back to your point again, Phil, that you won't build that advocacy that will help you in maintaining that retention that you're looking for when you lack the inclusion. So let's make sure that, and I'm glad you brought that up, Phil, because they are linked, but they are very distinct.
Great points. I love it. I love it. Claire, I know you have something to say. What do you want to say, Claire? You're ready to go. Great point.
Yeah, so all the panelists brought up such great points. I think my point, I wanted to zone in tiny little bit more into the whole concept of inclusion, equity, and diversity, because we can preach these concepts all we want, but when you are actually in the organization as a millennial or Gen Z, how the culture is constructed in their minds and how they perceive culture, it really all starts from the conversations and interaction. And tying into that, the advice that I would love to give to leaders that are listening to this is, don't use your own norms that you grew up with or you're used to in order to define your employees, and to further on to figure out, why are they acting this way? They're so weird. No, because you have to realize that these generations grew up. It's different generation for a reason, and that means that they grew up with very different norms. What is considered a norm to yourself, what is considered a norm to the company executives and owners who are baby boomers or traditionalists, versus what could be considered a norm to your manager that just became a manager, or to your intern, will be completely different. And you just have to realize that, yes, it's just different norms. We just have to accept them human to human, rather than using my norms to judge them, and further on and just and to also remind yourself that at the end of the day, they're just trying their best. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
That's a great point. I love how you talked about the norms. I like how you actually begin to talk about how generations are formed. So I think a lot of times people aren't aware, how do people determine what is a generation? I mean, you look at numbers and people have different different years. So like I'll just deal with millennials. I go from 1977 to 1994. People have different. They go 82 to 2000. Gen Z, I go 95 to 2010. People may switch that around. So you see different numbers. You see different perspectives. As far as samplings. And so I think it'd be good, and I'll let our panel, whoever wants to chime in on this really quickly, if you want to explain how are generations formed and how do generational experts get to this point of determining what is the generation. I also just want to say this, just because you're born and just because there's all this research about that particular generation, does that mean that's you? I mean, again, when I look at generations, I like to look at just trends, and I also like to look at samplings, and that's a whole nother discussion I talk about in my book. That I discovered in my dissertation. And me and Phil talked about this very briefly, and I'll just go a little step, like one of the foundations of millennial research, I realized that their sampling came from a community that was not as ethnic as the generation was. And so a lot of the research that was built around millennials was built more from a dominant culture versus an ethnic culture. And I think that is huge, because what I discovered in my research is when another lady did research in Santa Ana, California, which is more of a Hispanic culture, she found that what they were saying was not actually true because the ethnic lens was not included in the research. And I think that's a big thing that needs to be discussed when it comes to generational discussions in research, is who's actually in the sampling and who actually has the lens on the research. But I'm gonna let Phil, maybe I'll just go to you, Phil, or if you could just explain what is generations and how do they come up with these demographics? I think that's important. So I'll let the wonderful panelists chime in on that. I think that's an important thing that I want to interject really quickly.
Yeah, this is my passion right here, and that is that when it comes to understanding a generation and what makes a generational cohort, it's really important to start off that it is sociology. So it is a study of large groups of people. Psychology is the individual person. So there's always going to be exceptions to every generational norm or trend that you point out. That being said, it starts with the birth year, but really what sets or establishes a generational cohort are the formative years, the teenage years, the time of adolescent brain development when your mind is literally like wet cement. It's absorbing experiences in a very unique way. As you mature through life, your mind begins to solidify and maintains those experiences. So the example I often give is if you ever find yourself listening to music and a song comes on that was popular when you were in high school, it almost creates a physiological experience that's more powerful than other music that happens in your life just because of the time that you were shaped in. So when you bring up that element of culture, you fuse culture and generations. It's important to understand you go into any specific environment and the experiences, like you pointed out, let's say a Hispanic community in maybe pick California or Texas or Mexico or Latin America, their experiences in their formative years were shaped by both time and culture. I've done generational consulting in India, in Europe, in Africa, and one thing is true around the world at any point in history, there are always 4 generations that influence a society. We know them by these names: grandparents, parents, young adults, and children. That is a universal principle, any place, any time, but the experiences within that culture shift from one place to another, which then fosters different identities. And so that's what it's really important to understand. So I love that we're fusing the two in this discussion, understanding both the generational perspective, but specifically as it relates to various culture.
Great point. Great point. I want to go to this next question. I just want to clarify. I'm going to go to you, Dr. Sessions, because I know you have to leave a little early, and I want to start with you. And I know you do a lot of work around multi-generational work. And so I want to ask this question. How do you get to create multi-generational synergy? I know we've been focusing on millennials, we're focused on Gen Z, but I think, baby boomers are still very involved. Gen X is still very involved as well. How do we create multi-generational synergy within our workplace, within our leadership, so that we can all collectively work together. Because I feel like someone's always saying, well, that generation does it different, and this generation does it different. But how do we create this synergy? And so I'll start with you, Dr. Sessions, and we can move through on this question.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that I tell my clients they need to focus on. First is communication, right? Because all relationships start with good communication, good or bad. And I think that's going to set the foundation for success. So being able to communicate openly, be transparent about what your experiences have been, especially for Gen X and the boomers that are still in the workplace. Share with them, with the younger generations, what are some of the mistakes that you've made in your career? What are some of the lessons that you've learned along the way? And being open to their feedback and to their questioning. And then for Gen X and for Gen Y and Gen Z, what I share with them is to look into opportunities where you can do reverse mentorship. So instead of dismissing someone and saying, okay, boomer, say, you know what, let me show you this because I think it will help you be more efficient or more effective. Or are you open to me sharing with you how I'm able to move through my day so fast, or something to that effect, right? So it's about how we approach the learning and teachable moments with each other and each of those generations. That's going to help broaden the communication channel and also increase the level of trust between the different generations in the workforce, because that's the other component of having success is that level of trust amongst them. To know that you're going to treat me and talk to me as a human being first, not be dismissive. And as a way of me feeling that, then I feel I can be open to bring my ideas, my suggestions, ask questions, look to you for guidance, do reverse mentorship, right? Those types of things. So that's, again, what I've seen and what I've coached different organizations on, and it's been pretty effective.
That's awesome. Anybody else want to share really quickly in relation to that question?
Yeah, I'll share quickly to build on what Dr. Sessions said, and it kind of combines with what Phil and Claire talked about as well. When Claire talked about when we see these differences in behavior from a generational standpoint, is to understand why, right? And Miles Monroe said it so eloquently: when we don't know the purpose of something, abuse is inevitable. I think we should always start with why and getting an understanding. Okay, yes, there are differences. Why is this millennial thinking differently than me? Because as the saying goes, methods are many, principles are few. Methods will always change, but principles never do, right? We want the same thing. You're guided by the same principles. We have the same ultimate desired outcome. It's just different ways and approaches to doing it. I remember way back in the day, there was this baby boomer leader named Saul, and who had this company that was under attack. That was a threat to the company, and the threat was this opposing company by the name of Goliath Enterprises, right? And then this millennial employee came up to Saul and said, "Hey, I think I can eliminate the threat." And he said, "Well, look, we're really dismissive of you because you're too young and you don't know enough because you haven't been around long enough. But if you think you can, this is how we go about doing it. Use these materials to go about doing it." And that millennial David was like, "These materials don't work for me. They don't fit me. That this isn't the way that I think it can be best done. I've had some experience in eliminating threats like this. I've created this app that can eliminate this threat. Let me go out here and utilize my app." And so the desired outcome was the same. The approach was very different. And I think we should take time to understand why we see things differently instead of immediately being critical and dismissive of the difference.
That's really good. I love that analogy.
Okay, true. I'm borrowing that one.
I love that analogy is so good. I love the analogy. I love how you created David, Saul, and Goliath. That was really amazing. There's so much more that I think can go into it, because to go a little step farther, true, in regards to your story, if David would have used what Saul Enterprise was trying to give him, he probably would have lost. And I think that has something to do with what we're dealing with today. If we stay in what we used in the past, then we're less effective in the future. And I think one of the great things about the David generation, per se, is that David Enterprise is bringing a new mindset, is bringing a new attitude, and even bringing new insight in how we can be more effective. Like, one of the things I always say that I think is not going anywhere is this whole thing of virtual communication and virtual leadership and really just connecting remotely. And I came out as a student. I came, learning how to go through school as a virtual student. And I learned through that process, it's completely different from formal traditions of school. And although there's students that are struggling, there's some that are doing well, whether you fail or not, I often say failure is a preparation for success. So whatever the case may be, people are learning lessons, and as remote continues to become more prevalent, because from a bottom line standpoint, it's actually more cost effective, then students, although they may have failed, although they're having challenges, I would go so far to say they'll be more equipped to be better in the future. But that was a phenomenal point. And I want to go to this next point, this next question. So we had talked about this survey, and one of the things I discovered in the survey as well said, what are the number one reasons you leave a job? I was just curious, why do people leave a job? Why do you desire that you're going to leave a job? And number one across the board was lack of opportunities or ineffective leadership. And so my question is this: when it comes to leadership, when it comes to opportunities, how can we implement that as leaders of members of the millennial or Gen Z generation? What qualities should we actually highlight a little bit more? And then as far as it comes to opportunities, how can we do that better? And I'll start with you, Claire, and then we'll move to everyone else. Claire, it's on you. What are some things that you would like to add to this session?
So in terms of opportunities and things like that, I think that is very straightforward. I actually do need to take a look at the question again, just because I kind of missed on that one. What can leaders do to ensure that do not impact their retention? Actually, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, real quick. So ultimately, a couple of reasons that I found in my survey why people are leaving companies was because of a lack of leadership and a lack of opportunities. And so my question was, as leaders or as managers, what can we do to lead more effectively as well as to create more opportunities?
Okay. So this is gonna seem very counterintuitive to the points that were brought up before, but I'm gonna say it anyways, because once you hear the analogy, it's gonna realize that, oh, it actually adds on to this. And it is the fact that there will always be like that tension and that power dynamic, and you have to continue to make efforts to disregard that for the greater good for the organization, in terms of building that culture, building that transparent environment, building an environment where people can really thrive in and develop themselves. And here's what we mean by this. We can talk transparent communications, we can talk growth opportunities all we want, but the thing is, it's the power dynamic. Entry-level employees, mid-level employees, no matter how brave they are, quote unquote, there will always be a part of them that is afraid to go up to their managers asking for that opportunity. And managers and executives vice versa. They're gonna feel a little bit intimidated going to their entry mid-level employees and saying, hey, I feel like I would love to develop you into these things, because if you kind of say it wrong, then entry mid-level employees are gonna be, wait, so you're telling me I'm not good enough? What? So the point being, there is that dynamic and tension that comes from the different roles within the organization, as well as the generational norms and things like that. So with that being said, when you're talking to your employees, and whether in recruitment conversation, retention conversation, and so on, know that because of these factors, some of the factors are never going to be addressed in the first place. And it is your job as a leader to kind of foresee what might be the case and creating the psychological safety so that they are able to, so that they feel comfortable asking for that opportunity. Because for all they know, they might not even be aware that these opportunities within the organization exist. So that's what I want to bring up. I know that it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but that's the best. I feel that's the best thing to address when we're talking about keeping the employees, because without that psychological safety, nothing is going to be effective.
Right. No, and I think it was a great point. Psychological safety, I think that's really, really big. As well as opportunities, asking for the opportunities. That's a whole nother discussion in itself. I think that's a really good point. But I'm going to let Dr. Sessions, True, or Phil chime in on that question. But yeah, that asking for the opportunity, that's a whole nother conversation. But I'll let you all chime in.
Yeah, I'll go first if you don't mind, because I do have to log off. So I want to wrap with what my experience was when I was a millennial. And I remember a manager one time, one of my direct managers said to me that if I didn't tell her what I wanted in terms of my career, then because I was doing such a good job, she just always thought that's what I wanted to do, right? And so I kind of kept that to heart as we were doing my performance review. And I got up the nerve, so to Claire's point, I got up the nerve during my next review with her when she asked me, you know, what is that you want to do long term, et cetera. And I said, I want your job. And that was a green light to her to say, okay, let me pour into her, because no one's ever said that to me before. And as a result, I was promoted like within 6 months, because I was already doing the work, but because I was so effective and so good and you know, seemed happy, right? The impression was she's doing what she wants, so why touch her? Why bother her? But when we sat down and had that conversation, and I said, I'm going to go for it, right? And I said, I want your job one day. And she said, that's good to know. I can help you get there. That was a game changer for me, and I never looked back.
That's a really great story. There's so much in that. And I think what I want to say, I think also not only on your side, but also on the leader's side, making sure the leader has the right heart, that the leader's open enough to serve as well. That was really good. And one thing I want to chime in, I know Phil, and go Phil. I'll let you go first. Yeah, it's on you, Phil.
No, I can't get enough. I want to make sure Dr. Sessions had enough time, because she is going to bounce. She has so much to offer. But I think as it relates to some of the things that were just shared, and going back to Claire's point and having the confidence, when I look at this generationally, earlier I said one of the myths is that if you understand millennials, you understand Gen Z, or even if you understand within a generation. It's important to understand that early millennials on the older spectrum, those whose formative years were pre-recession, when the world was in a little better place, they entered the workforce with a lot of confidence, and they weren't afraid to walk into the manager or the owner's office and tell them what they thought. Now that millennials are managers in positions of leadership, and they're working with younger Gen Z folk, they expect that they're going to have that same type of, boldness. And to double down on True's brilliant example earlier, after David became CEO of the company, there was another Gen Z person by the name of Solomon who came in. He was far more contemplative. He thought a little differently. And so as to work with that person, to motivate that next Gen Z person, they needed more coaching. They needed more support. They weren't just going to take the reins like that. So I love Claire's point. Creating that psychological safety for Gen Z in particular is going to be really important.
That's great. That's great. True. It looks like you're ready to say something. You got to say true.
No, man, I just want to applaud my fellow panelists, man. You all are so dope. Like, seriously,
You too.
I'm loving this. I'm loving this. One of the things that I want to share is a couple of words that jumped out to me in this exchange, as we talked about leadership, as we talked about managers, and Claire talked about the power dynamic. I want to make sure that our leaders that are watching understand the distinction between leadership and management, right? And leadership is about power, Claire, in my experience, right? I just want to preface that. In my experience, leadership is about power, where management is about control. And when I say leadership is about power, that's not a negative, because the person with the most responsibility needs the most authority to be effective. And I think intuitively, we all understand that. And so when we identify someone as the leader, if we say, okay, Phil, you're going to be our leader, it's because we have collectively decided you're the biggest, brightest, strongest, fastest. You are the most effective to be responsible for the rest of our safety, growth, and development. So it's leadership is something that the people decide they are going to give you that power. I think too often leaders think they take the power, but a collective decision about those that you've been giving stewardship over to give you the power. And the way that you maintain that power is by giving it back. And that's how we empower others. But it goes back to identifying what are their gifts, what are their passions, how can they best serve. We have to understand that in order to empower them. And the more you give the power back, the more comfortable they are to trust you with giving you more power. That's how we retain power as leaders, is by giving it back to the people and empowering them to be the best. And where I say management is about control, if you've gone to business school, if you understand the theory of the triple constraints of management, there are only three things that we can control, that we can manage, and that is time, money, and resources. We can manage, we can control how much time we invest into something. We can control the amount of resources that we invest into something. And the quality is the third thing we can control. And that's a factor of the first two, how much time we invest, how much money or resources we invest. What we cannot control are people. And too often we try, but we can lead people. And so I just want to, for all of those that are in leadership positions out there, keep in mind that as much as you try to control people, it will fail miserably every time, but you can lead people. The only things we can control, particularly in a business setting, is time, money, and quality.
Wow, that was amazing. Drop the gems. Drop the gems. Dr. Session, I know you got to get ready to go, really. So is there anything, last words you want to say real quick? We're going to continue the discussion, everyone, but Dr. Session, anything you want to say really quickly before you step away?
No, just again, for each of the attendees here, hopefully you're taking a lot of this information down, not just for yourself, but maybe even take it back to your workplace and talk to your manager or your coach about this, because I think, again, there's some great gems that are being dropped by every one of the panelists and our hosts as well. So thanks again for having me. Sorry I had to drop off, but it was great seeing everyone.
Thank you so much to Dr. Session. Make sure you connect with Dr. Session on LinkedIn. She does wonderful work, and she also speaks as well. So if you're looking for speakers, make sure you reach out to her. So again, thank you so much. And I want to piggyback on a point that I thought was talking about as far as gifts, as far as your path that I actually talk about in my book. There's two things that I talk about. One of them I talk about is a type of leadership style. So one of the style of leadership that I discovered in my dissertation that I talk about in my book is this concept of the transformational leadership style. Study after studies have shown that when leaders have what they call the transformational leadership style, it actually has a positive resolve as it relates to retention. I also think servant leadership is another one as well. And again, it's across the board. I know this thing works right here as it relates to when you're leading millennials particularly, as well as Gen Zs. When you have this heart, where you have this mission, where you have this vision, where you're inspirational, where you don't just talk the talk, but you actually walk the walk. All that really makes a difference as it relates to retention, as well as leading members of the younger generation. And the other thing that I want to bring up, and I'm sure anyone can bring on as well, we do opportunities, is I have a good friend, and he was VP of a pretty big company. And he used to talk to me about his onboarding process. And, a lot of people in HR talk about onboarding, and they talk about how the onboarding literally can affect your retention or whether some stays engaged. So literally, when you meet them, if you don't have the right onboarding process, it can affect the productivity, it can affect the growth of the individual. Not only have I saw this in research, I saw this in people around me as well. I saw them thrive in the job when they had the onboarding experience right. And I saw people that didn't do well at all because they didn't get no direction, they didn't get no understanding at all. But what's so amazing about my good friend, what he shared with me as I was writing the book and doing my research, and again, this just came up in my research, was that he said with his millennials or even members of Gen Z, they would do what they call a career path. So in the onboarding experience, they would not just teach you the job, they would actually give you a trajectory of what they see you doing over the next year. So they would have a trajectory the first 90 days and then the first 6 months. And they say, okay, this is where we see you at right here. This is where we see you at right here. And they would systematically have development programs. They would also include mentorship programs, have you talk to CEOs, and then have a checkup to actually not only be seeing how you're doing, but to make sure that you're actually seeing opportunity, to make sure you're seeing growth. And one of the things that he discovered is that he said sometimes we want to give them I guess the word I want to say, a vertical promotion. We would sometimes give them a horizontal promotion, because I don't know what to say, promotion or horizontal responsibility. So maybe let's say student affairs. Maybe you started in housing, but your true passion was leadership. Well, maybe you're not the director yet, but the fact that you made a horizontal with the same title in a different department can be huge, because you have a new opportunity, but also now you're more passionate about it. Therefore, you want to be there longer as well. So that was just something that I was able to uncover as we were having this conversation. But I want to move into this next question. And my next question is this. What I want to ask is, I guess I asked another question. I said, when you start a new job, and again, this was millennials and Gen Z. I actually had more Gen Zs than millennials. But I said, when you start a new job, what is the number one thing that you want to develop? And believe it or not, and true, I guess you're ahead of me. You already said leader versus manager, but the number one thing that I heard was leadership skills and management skills. And so I want to ask this question, whoever like to chime in first. What specific leadership, I'm going to stay with leadership, I won't go to management. What specific leadership skills should we be developing in our millennial and Gen Z leaders now that will prepare them to prosper, prepare them to propel in the next 5 to 10 years? And so whoever wants to jump in first, please feel free to jump in.
Well, I'll go since my colleagues are just processing this, and they can refine and make my ramblings much more intelligent. But I'll come back to one of my premises, and that is let's look at millennials and Gen Z just slightly different, and develop them as they need to be developed. Every individual is different, so that's important. But if we're going to talk about them as a whole, if we look at millennials and the confidence that often they brought, and that belief that if I don't have new opportunities on a regular basis, I'm going to become obsolete. I have spoken with millennials who are now, 15 years into their career, and they're looking back, and while they climbed the quote ladder of success quickly, they look back saying, I wish I would have taken a little bit more time to develop some skills at that stage in my life, because now I'm realizing I'm struggling. So one thought for millennials is to coach their leadership skills, to couple their confidence with some depth of knowledge in the particular role that they're serving in, so that they can truly capitalize on some of those things that they can control, quality and so forth. And also, I love True's point about when you give power, you get it back. So just to understand that power base. On the flip side, with Gen Z, while they want to become leaders, it's almost from a different mindset. We find that many Gen Z are often risk averse. They don't want to put themselves in a position where they might fail. And so where they often need to be developed is, I guess, coaching them on being uncomfortable. It's okay to put yourself in a position where it will challenge you, but that's going to lead to better results. There's no failure, right? You win some, you learn some. You never failed, but there's an opportunity to grow in this challenging situation. And I'll point out something, I'm not sure if I mentioned it earlier, but for the most part, baby boomers were the parents of millennials. And for the most part, Gen Xers are the parents of Gen Z. So they had different inputs as they were coming of age. And Gen X, kind of a more of a no nonsense, I'm going to, let's do this one thing, do it well, had a different set of experiences. So we have to coach them differently if we're going to develop their leadership skills.
Wow, that's great. That's really good. I love it. I love it. Those are great breakdowns. Claire, True? Claire, I guess.
Claire, did you have something?
I was still trying to process, but I would say something that I guess without putting on the generational labels per se, but something that I feel will be really beneficial for millennials and Gen Z to develop. Again, especially if you're a leader watching this, consider the emotional intelligence aspect of it. And this, although yes, this can apply all across the generation, but when we step into the workplaces and going through, there's a lot of challenges. There's gonna be life things happen, and it's important that as for millennials and Gen Z demographic in particular, where they are a little bit more ambitious demographic, they want to move up and so on, it's going to be extremely imperative for them to develop the extent of emotional intelligence that allows them to better tolerate failure, better communicate with in a situation where they might not necessarily agree because it doesn't go with their beliefs, but they still kind of have to stick through with it and so on. I'll say that's the only thing. I feel like the other components have been very well addressed in the questions and as well as what Bill was talking about.
Awesome. And you want to add to real quick?
Yeah, I'll build on what Phil talked about and the importance of communication, right, as a leadership skill or leadership attribute. Communication cannot be emphasized enough. And something else that Phil touched on was, I want to encourage everyone to, yes, there are generational archetypes, right? There are generational similarities across the different generations. But it cannot be emphasized enough to get to know the individual, right? Get to know the person that you are working with, to understand what's going to motivate and inspire that individual to be the best that they can be. Absolutely, we can get a bit of a head start with understanding the generational personalities by a lot of the information that's been shared today in some studies, and there's some validity to that. But I think it's important that we are mindful of the importance of getting to know the individual. And when I think of leadership, Josh, I go back to how I define it, right? It's not the same definition in the dictionary. I get it, but I wasn't quite satisfied with that definition. So I searched high and low, little John Maxwell, our military. I looked at, a lot of different examples in leaders. And so the definition that I begged, borrowed, and stole from different sources was leadership is the process of influencing people by providing them with purpose, vision, and direction to accomplish the greater good. And after I wrote the definition down, I guess my Russell Crowe moment in A Beautiful Mind, and I know a lot of my millennials and Gen Z probably have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, but my Russell Crowe moment was the words that jumped off of the page for me after I wrote it down. Ironically, and as speakers, you can appreciate that they were all the 4 P words, and I did not plan this, I promise you, but you can appreciate alliteration as a speaker, right? And the first P was, it's reminding people that it's a process. It's what you do. It's not based on a title or position. Leadership is a verb. It's an action. It's what you do. Keeping that in mind. And it's the process of influencing people. It should always be about people, not about a bottom line, not about a margin, not about numbers, not about data. The people are the resources that help you to achieve that. So it's about how are you treating the people, right? And then it's about influencing people by what? Providing them with. It's about provision. What are you giving? How are you serving? You have a responsibility to these people. It's not about a position of authority that you lord over someone. It's a role of responsibility that you have for others. And then that final P is purpose. It's about providing clarity of purpose as to why not only the organization exists, but helping them establish a clarity of purpose of the value contribution that they make to helping the organization achieve its organizational purpose. So if you can help them navigate those 4 Ps, if you will, based on the definition of leadership, I think that will help set you and that individual up for being successful in leadership.
I love it, man. What such great points. I mean, so many great points. I mean, there's so much, and I love the thing that you talk about process. I think that's so important because we're always becoming better as a leader. I like to use the concept of a growth mindset. You never stop learning, you never stop growing, you never stop evolving. And the other thing I like you said action. Leaders actually do something, to actually get involved. And so I thought that kind of correlates to what Phil said about, Gen Zs want to be comfortable, but get them out the box, get them the experiences, letting them, challenge them just to step out and do something. I thought that was so great. And I guess to add on to that, and I firmly agree with emotional intelligence, Claire, and I really think out the box and people and influence. I think that emotional intelligence really connects with everything that was said as well. Just a couple of things I want to share. I think what's really big is being able to make what I call data-driven decisions. I hear a lot of leaders talk about how they use data or research to make decisions. I was never taught that in any leadership, and I've done a lot of leadership in my time, but I know that's a big deal, being able to look at data and make decisions based off data, especially when you deal with social media, you deal with algorithms and all that kind of stuff. I think that's definitely a skill set. And also virtual leadership. How do you lead virtual teams? How do you lead not just virtual teams in the country, but multinational virtual teams? So I definitely think that's important. Obviously, which is pretty common sense, is adaptable leadership, right? I think adaptability is so incredibly important as well. We're like about 15 minutes left, and real quickly, just want to remind you all, if you have any questions, and I'm a little late because they were talking so good that I forgot. I was so lost in what was being shared. But if you have a question, I want you to know that I am looking at the chat box. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask questions right now. And Stephanie, yes, this will be shared once the recording is available. We do share the recording. Thank you all so much for sharing how you're liking what's being said. You're liking the gems and everything that's being shared today. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. But again, if you have a question specifically that you want to ask, just put it in the chat box and I will make sure that I do my best to answer that question. Secondly, make sure you follow all of these speakers. Our video producer has been putting them in the chat box. And so make sure you connect with them on LinkedIn if you want to learn more about their work. If you're looking for speakers, again, reach out to them. I think one of the things that I love about these speakers, and me and Phil talked about this, is so many times when you deal with generational speakers, you rarely see people of color. And so the fact that we have that on the panel today, I really love that. So if you're looking for generational work, you have some incredible people that have done incredible research. So make sure you reach out to them. As far as Circle of Change, y'all know we have the virtual leadership experience coming up for first-gen students in April. We are doing our national conference in November. But again, it's available now for the first 150 that register. We're going to be giving out a free iPad as well as maybe $250. So make sure you register. And if the number's really good, y'all, we're going to up it to about 1,000. So the more that register, the more I'm going to give away. So, or if someone gets inspired, they want to sow. If you want to give $1,000 to give over scholarship, we will receive it. We are a 501 free organization. I promise you, we will give it to students because I'm all about giving, and I love when we have the opportunity to give scholarships. It is very impactful in students' lives as well. And again, my book will be out very soon, redleadershipbooks.com, and you'll definitely get an email if you hear about that. But that'll be out as well. And so right now, I don't see any questions that are coming up. And so I guess, where should I start? I don't know who to start. I guess I'll start with you, Claire, for my final question. And my final question is this, and I love stories, and I love how True integrated so many stories. And I'm still on this one, the Saul, the David, the Goliath, and then Phil said Solomon. That right there, wow, that was like amazing. I love that a lot. But I'm gonna start with you, Claire. We've talked about a variety of things, and I want to know: is there a story? Is there a research finding, or is there an experience that you have witnessed that you would like to share about the power of us being effective at developing the next generation of leaders? So whatever story you want to share, whatever research or finding, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll move back through. So it's on you, Claire.
So research and retaining development, and honestly, I don't really have too many personal stories around this because like I have mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I am late millennial, early Gen Z. So there isn't too many years to kind of go back to, but I would say in retaining, developing, and engaging with the leaders, one story that is actually there's quite a bit, so I think I'm going to try to generalize the story as much as possible. And it's like when we're approaching like culturally diverse members of the organization, I've actually seen the difference when for example, working with Canadian organizations versus American-based organizations or Singaporean-based organizations or European organizations and so on, because of their approach, like the country's approach on multiculturalism. And and for example, Canada, we use an approach of mosaic. That's the analogy that we use, where every culture is an add-on to the whole entire piece. Whilst US, they use the analogy of a melting pot, where you use where you put in all of these culturally diverse characteristics, and you kind of combine it and see what comes out of it. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, in terms of the retaining, developing culturally diverse members, you need to know what approach best works for your organization, what worked best for your organization before, and what is going to continue to work right now, because there are so many great practices, just like there are so many bad practices. And with that being said, if you don't know your organization and if you don't know your people, then what's going to happen is you're going to be flip-flopping back and forth trying to figure out what's going to work the best. next and what's going to work, it's not only affects the culture negatively at the internal, but also it gives you very lack of clarity as a leader. So I would say that's the final note that I'm going to be leaving is know what works best for your organization. And I guess jumping back to the point that I brought up before is don't use your own norms or whatever other people's norms are as a standard. Create your own norms and create the one, and then make sure that everyone in the organization is on board and they are feeling all safe about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Claire. I love it. Awesome. True. Phil, who would like to go first? I'll let you both decide.
I'll go first because I have a feeling True is going to drop a microphone moment that's going to wrap this thing up, and we all just going to go out like, wow. So no pressure, brother, but I'm just looking forward to it. I want it to be the exclamation. I'll just say real quickly, specifically to the question that you're posing in terms of engaging, retaining, and developing culturally diverse members of a younger generation. And I'll qualify culturally diverse in this context as often maybe underrepresented if we're going to focus on call it what it is. And the story I would share is a fusion of my own story and then what I've observed. I didn't come up with money necessarily, but I came up with some of the most valuable experience in my life. And that is my father was born and raised in Uganda in East Africa. He grew up literally in a mud hut, grass roof, no electricity, no running water. My grandfather emphasized the importance of education to him. He was the oldest son. He had to set the example. Ended up getting a full scholarship, came to America. We went back to Uganda, war broke out. I grew up here in the United States. But I grew up with the mindset that of the example my father gave me, that I can go to college, that I can succeed. I just believed in my own potential. So as I've worked my whole career working with young people, helping them grow, adolescent development, make that transition from young adulthood into adulthood, I've always been frustrated by the lack of intrinsic belief in a person's ability to achieve beyond what they see every day. And so the story that stands out to me is 2008 when President Obama won the election, and the same high schools that I had been speaking in for a dozen years prior, going to those students, all of a sudden something shifted in the young people that I was speaking to. They began to see and believe that they could achieve more than most of the examples that they had seen around them. And so I think what leadership needs to understand is one thing to talk about these issues and have someone come and address them. But when you literally create an environment of equity where you're seeing and helping people rise to real levels of position, empowering them, becoming allies, that will have the biggest impact on the community, because people will begin to see themselves in a better position. And so again, that's the greatest privilege I've had, is seeing that example for myself and my father. And I want other people to have that same example as well.
Wow, that's powerful. That was a great point. Man, it is so true. Oh my God, it's so true. And I'm just going to chime in. I know True talks about this. I got a son, and my son is 4.5 years old. He gets ready to turn 5 April 1st. And I mean, he's like on my side. Like if I say jump off the cliff, he'll probably jump off the cliff. Like I'm a Lakers fan, so he has a Lakers jersey. But it's so true how I know in my household, my son looks up to me. Like the fact, like my example, like if he was here right now because he saw me speak so much, he'll get in here. And one thing my son says, and I also do ministry as well, and this is so funny, he said, preach the Bible, preach the Bible. And it is so funny. And me and my wife looking like, I'm like, it's just hilarious to me, man. And so I got to take it, but that's so true what you're saying, and that's so powerful. We got to have examples. We got to have representation. But True, it's on you, True.
No, and Phil, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's important, right? That we talk about representation through a lens of inclusion, equity, and diversity, as you mentioned before. And again, a point that I believe you brought up was about the levels of discomfort that we can experience in having those uncomfortable conversations. Mm-hmm. There's a lot going on in our society as we're talking about generational differences. And we should be looking at it through a lens of inclusion, equity, and diversity, because that's one piece of it. There is racial diversity and gender and lifestyle, sexual orientation, political. We're seeing so much division, and I would venture to say we are experiencing so much division and need for healing because we are uncomfortable having those conversations about race, about ethnicity, oftentimes about generational differences. And so I love the point that you made earlier about, we need to become more comfortable in having those uncomfortable conversations across whatever the differences may be. And so I'll close out with the what I call the lobster story, right? I don't know if you've heard the lobster story. Have you heard the lobster story, Josh?
Nah.
Have you heard the
I'm excited to hear that. I'm like smiling. I'm ready to hear.
I'm ready.
So we've all seen lobsters, right? Back in the day, I fancied myself somewhat of a ladies' man, Claire. And back in the day, you used to take your date to Red Lobster. I don't know if you know about that, Claire. You used to take your date to Red Lobster, right? And now
I've
you was doing something if you
never
took
been
a
to Red Lobster.
And so if you've seen lobsters before, you know that there are big lobsters and then there are small lobsters. So that lets us know that lobsters grow, right? And that growth process of a lobster is called the molting process. But as a part of the molting process, what we know through science is that the shell of a lobster does not grow. So lobsters grow, but the shell does not grow. So then it begs the question, well, how do lobsters grow? True. Well, I'm glad you asked. When it's time for a lobster to grow, it sheds its shell. And once it sheds its shell, it's now vulnerable because that's what it uses to protect itself. And so the lobsters go to the ocean floor, the bottom of the ocean. They find a rock formation to go into to keep themselves protected until they regenerate a new shell. Once they've regenerated that new shell, they try it on for size, make sure it fits, and then they go back out into the ocean and they do lobster things. I don't know what lobsters do, right? But they go back out into the ocean and they're doing lobster things. And the question becomes, well, how does a lobster know when it's time to grow? It knows it's time for it to grow when it gets uncomfortable. And that is a representation of growth when we embrace the discomfort. And when we embrace that discomfort, it's going to require us to become vulnerable, like the lobster, and shed that shell. But we need to be each other's rocks. We need to be that safe space for one another when we're in that vulnerable state. So identify the rocks in your life. Surround yourself with people that want more for you than they want from you. And we need to be the rocks for one another during that vulnerable state to allow us to grow, to educate the ignorance, not to condemn it. And then once we have regenerated those new shells, then we'll be able to go out into the world better, stronger, faster, until it's time for us to shed that shell again. But we know it's time to grow when we're in an uncomfortable position or situation. And so I want to encourage you all to embrace the uncomfortable conversations because it simply represents growth.
Amen.
Drop the mic. That's it. Drop the mic. Man, wow, the lobster story. That was incredible. Wow, I loved it. We have about, whoa, man, I got it. 3 minutes. I got to get ready. Because there was a question that came in. I don't know if you all want to answer the question that came in. Would you mind? Would y'all mind this one question I got real quick? I just got texted to me. It says real quick, we're doing it in 1 minute. What career resume advice would you give to a millennial professional who may have done the work but lacks promotional growth leadership title due to limited opportunities? Did anybody get that?
Yeah,
Claire looks like she's excited to answer that.
Answer this because I actually, before I officially pivot into HR consulting, I was doing operational, and and something that I was kind of doing on the side was resume edits. And this is something that came up a lot. And the best tip that I can be giving is speak their language. And here's what we mean by this. when you're looking at anything past entry-level positions, they really start to get quantitative and really tied to the strategic objective of the organization. And when I'll be looking at these millennial, like late millennial professionals in particular, as well as Gen Z, you look at their resume and you compare it with, and you see how everything's phrased, and then you look at job posting and you start to dig more into the organization and their objective and stuff. You realize that what they're saying on the resume doesn't really connect with what was written in the job posting as well as the organization's objective. So some points that you can be making over here. So for example, let's say we led a discussion group. Well, okay, that's great, but how can we quantify that? So let's say if you were to tweak that into led a discussion group of culturally diverse employees, anywhere from 3 employees to 10 employees. Boom. Now that shows your leadership skills. That shows your soft skills through communication. But at the same time, it also contributes to the organization's objective of building up their talent pipelines, because for many organizations, that is their priority right now, is getting more culturally diverse members. Now, can they retain them? Totally different story. But to just focus on that question is just really tie it back to their language, because even though, yes, counters the point of, don't use your own norms as standard, it also has to do with who is the reader and who is the one seeing the thing. So that's why I had to bring this point up. I'm pretty sure Phil and Drew also has a lot of great pointers around this question, but yeah.
Awesome.
I wish I could offer more value. I haven't developed a resume. I haven't created a resume, and I can't even tell you when the last time I created a resume. So thank you for that, Claire. I am taking notes over here myself. I wish I could offer more value in that area, but it's just not my area of expertise.
Which is another conversation that we could talk about, is how True is getting powerful positions without a resume. That's a whole nother conversation, because there's a lot of people that I know within a variety of industries that they get tapped on the shoulder for certain positions based on reputation, based on character, based on results, and based on leadership. That's another conversation for a whole nother day. But thank you so much for taking the time to ask that question. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to be a part of this virtual masterclass. I mean, really exceeded my expectations. It was incredible. What an incredible group of panelists. What incredible information. And I'm just excited that I got to be a part of it and got to be a part of the service to you, where you can be empowered to go out and use the information. So again, thank you all so much for your continued support of what we are doing to do our part in making the world a better place. Again, there's so many amazing people doing their part, and we're just a small piece of trying to do our part to make the world a better place. Because if you do not know, we need more leaders. We need more culturally diverse, or as Phil said, underrepresented leaders in powerful positions. We need examples. We need this. And I'm telling you, our organization is committed to it 110%. We're definitely locked in on that for sure. And so again, I want to thank you all so much. You'll get an email, a follow-up email in regards to the recording, so that you'll make sure you'll be able to have that. And again, look out for other emails that'll be coming soon, because we have another session in the next 3 weeks. And just to give you insight before we even get there, it'll be focused on first-generation students and career readiness. And so looking forward to that. But again, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful weekend. And we'll see you in a few weeks. Peace.